Andy Kennedy. Hey, Frank, looking well, mate. Think our midfield problem is going to cost a bit to put right, but I'm confident we'll get it right eventually. You never walk alone. Let's hope, Andy, because as I said, well, listen, if you're staying with me, I'll be talking about football in the second hour of the show after the clip. But I'm going to bring in the author of that. That's unbelievable. It's like an encyclopedia of rock and roll unravelled. And there he is. There he is. Good evening, Derek.
Frank, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to Jason.
Yes, Happy New Year to you as well. Are you looking forward to 2023?
Oh, I think so. I think it's could be it's going to be an interesting year, whatever happens. Yeah. I mean, there's so much going on around the world, and particularly in the UK at the moment. Absolutely incredible times to live through.
Well, this is it. I think we've lived, especially me. I've lived through some. It's been like a roller coaster, my life, in terms of, just living. To be honest, it's absolutely. I can go back, which you'll be talking about in a moment or two. I go back to the 60s and going down. I never ever went to Cavan. I never ever went. I only went once, and I was with me mates. We were all young lads, so we all decided to go to the Cavan one night.
Yeah.
And we queued up, in Matthew Street, we queued up. We're all standing there. And what we seen then was like, we called them hippies, to be honest, because they were just standing there with duffel coats on. And,
yeah, exactly.
So we standing there talking to them. And we were in suits and ties,
That's what people wore then, Italian suits, narrow, slim jim ties. All the go.
With the
trousers, three-button jacket.
That's right. And so anyway, we were in there, and we were going down the steps, into the cellar. And we heard this van pull up. We're on the steps. And we heard the van pull up, doors opening. Because it took ages to get in, with the doorman. And all of a sudden, see this, all of a sudden, a bass drum comes bouncing down. A bass drum, and it's hit one of the lads, a fellow named Benny Ambrose. And it's hit him. I knew it was. There was no fighting. Because he thought he got it, it was deliberate. Anyway, I knew it was Dave Clark.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He was in. Started fighting it. We got
being hit by Dave Clark. Bass drum's a bit of a story, isn't it, really?
It is. Anyway, we never got in, unfortunately. So, and it wasn't until, I don't know whether it was 73, I think it was 73, 74, whenever it was pulled down. I went in there for some reason. I was with someone. He said, "Yeah, we'll go in here for a coffee." And that was the Cavan. It was pulled down there, shut down then a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
Which is mad, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay, so what are you going to tell us about? You want to talk about Bob Dylan?
Yeah, I thought interesting. We should be talking about the 60s. That was what made me think this week would be a particularly good time, because in 2 or 3 days' time, it's the 60th, believe it or not, anniversary of Bob Dylan's first visit to the UK. Wow. He came over on the 13th. Well, he came over a little bit before, but on the 13th of January, 63, he appeared in a BBC TV play called The Madhouse on Castle Street. He played a sort of itinerant guitarist. He played 4 songs in the show, and that sort of punctuated the plot, which was about, it sounds like a happy play. It's some guy locks himself away in a boarding house room to get away from the world. And in that, one of the 4 songs he played was Blowing in the Wind, interestingly enough, which was the first, ever major performance of that particular song. I mean, what had happened was that, I mean, just to go back to the beginning, he was born in 24th of May, 41, Robert Allen Zimmerman in Duluth, Minnesota. They moved across to Hibbing, Minnesota. And in his graduation yearbook from high school, 59, he listed his ambition as to join Little Richard. And I thought that was great. And what happened in 61, he went to New York. He met Woody Guthrie, who was in hospital with not Parkinson's, Huntington's, about 4 days after he arrived in New York. Then his first real break was he was in the studio to play harmonica, session musician type harmonica on Catalin Hester's third album. And the guy producing it, John Hammond, liked Dylan, and he signed him up to Columbia. So he got his break from being a session musician. He also played on a Harry Belafonte session as well, on the title track for Midnight Special. Then his first album came out in 62, just called Bob Dylan. But what's interesting is...
Can I ask you something? You know, that Harry Belafonte, because he was more like a calypso singer.
Oh, absolutely. Banana Boat song he had a big hit with in the UK.
Well, how did he, you know, say like you and I were singers and, you know, and we needed a session fella in, you know, to play drums or to play the guitar or whatever. What was he playing? What was he doing? Bob Dylan, how did he?
Well, what had happened is because he impressed John Hammond so much when he was with Catalin Hester, he'd been signed to the label. So he was, he was probably called in because of that. I mean, interesting enough as well, you know, we're moving into the protest song era, and Harry Belafonte was one of those guys that was blacklisted by McCarthy. So he was very much part of that whole protest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's a brilliant take, that, because Dylan's always been a protester. Do you think that's one of the reasons why Lennon really loved Dylan? You know, because of his activist role, shall we say?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you should mention John Lennon. And I think the basic answer is yes. But it's interesting the way the Beatles came across Bob Dylan. It was his Freewheeling album, his second album. And the Beatles were in Paris doing a 3-week gig in the sort of January, February of 64. And Paul McCartney was probably doing an interview or something with a radio DJ. And the DJ gave him a copy of Dylan's Freewheeling, which Paul then played to the others. And in the Beatles anthology book, John talks about this. And this is like quote now from John in the Beatles anthology book. And what John says is, I think that was the first time I ever heard Dylan at all. And he went on to say, and for the rest of the 3 weeks in Paris, we didn't stop playing it. We all went potty on Dylan. And then just after that, his whole songwriting style changed, and it moved away from boy meets girl, boy kisses girl, boy loses girl, boy wins girl. And he started writing more sort of autobiographical songs, much deeper. And he puts that down to this discovering Dylan and Dylan's much more lyrical content. So, yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that he was a really big influence on Dylan was a big influence on, well, all the Beatles, I think, but particularly John and John's writing style. Just one quick thing on that Freewheeling album. It's one of the most collectible albums in the history of albumdom. The very first release was with 4 different tracks. So please, if you're listening to this, check your attic. And if you pick out a Bob Dylan album called Freewheeling, and you look at the track listing, and it's got Rocks and Gravel, Let Me Die in My Footsteps, Rambling Gambling Willie, and Talking John Birch Society Blues, it's worth a lot of money. And what happened was it was withdrawn very shortly after, probably because of the song Talking John Birch Society Blues. And I looked to see if I could find a valuation today, somebody who was selling it, but I couldn't. But what I did find from like 2005, a valuation in Goldmine magazine, which is the American Bible for record collecting. And in 2005 edition of that, it lists that particular version of Freewheeling was worth $100,000. And that's like
Whoa.
that's 20 years ago. So I think you can fairly say
Whoa.
it's worth a bit
Whoa.
more than that now. It's check
So
the
that,
attic.
like, if you've got a master, like the first copy, shall we say, it's like a first edition of a book, isn't it? You know, if you've got
That's
that,
right.
it's worth a lot of money. And albums are the same.
Yeah.
Do you know what album I had? And it was signed, and it was an original. I forget what it was called now. It was, but anyway, it was by Fats Domino.
Yeah.
And just went missing. Fats
Oh,
Domino
that's tragic.
signed,
Yeah.
and it was, what was it called? I forget what it was called anyway. But you know, so any masters, shall I call them masters? Any like Please Please Me, the original album of Please Please Me. That's worth a lot of money. Any originals.
Yeah,
So
what it
you
is, I
know,
mean, the reason this Dylan one is so collectible is because they recalled it, changed 4 tracks, and put it out again. So, you know, it is completely, well, you can't be completely unique. You know, it is unique in that sense. And the thing about the Beatles album, the first one, Please Please Me, is that most people think about the black and label yellow as being the original release. And across most of the country, it was.
Yeah.
But in small parts of the country, probably just London, the very original copies were on a black gold, I think, label. And they are worth an absolute fortune. So again, you know, a lot to do with values of records is whether or not what the label is, if any tracks had changed, if there are mistakes in terms of albums playing the wrong tracks or listing the wrong tracks in the wrong order, as well as things, as you say, acetates and stuff like that. I mean, it's an absolute oasis for record collectors. There's so much to be going at.
Okay, that's great.
One of the other things worth mentioning, because we're only obviously in half an hour or so, 40 minutes, we're not going to get into a detailed story of Bob Dylan's life. I mean, interesting is this. So I thought we'd pick some highlights. And another one is, of course, when he went electric. And what's interesting about that is, you know, he's always thought of as being a folk purist, acoustic guitarist. I mean, his first single he released in America, again, withdrawn very quickly. That was actually Electric. And what happened was that he moved through 3 or 4 albums from acoustic to half electric. And then by Highway 61, he was completely electric. But there's the infamous Newport Folk Festival in 1965. What happened was he played a sort of acoustic set in the afternoon. Then in the evening, he was chatting with Paul Butterfield, who was there. And he went on later in the, he closed the show, I think. He went on with 4 of Paul Butterworth's blues band, Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper, the guy who does the awesome organ riff on Like a Rolling Stone, and Barry Goldberg, another keyboard player, Jerome Arnold and Sam Lay, they were the rhythm section, and they were actually from Howlin' Wolf's band, so, you know, a heck of a pedigree. But what happened was that a lot of the audience took a dim view, and he was getting lots of boos. Then he played 3 songs, and they left the stage to a sort of chorus of booing. But there's quite a controversy. Well, not controversy. There's quite a discussion amongst sort of Dylan fans as to why the booing was. And some of the purists said it's because he turned his back on the acoustic guitar and the purism of it, as it were. But there are lots of other suggestions that one of the problems was the sound quality. You know, Dylan's voice was very low down in the mix. It was poor quality. They couldn't really hear Dylan. I mean, what happened? He borrowed an acoustic guitar off Peter Yarrow, Peter, Paul and Mary, and went back on and did a couple more songs. And what's interesting about that, sort of just follow on that with that, oh, Dylan's got electric. Ah! He went on a world tour. And when he got to the UK, we're now in the sort of May of '66. He was playing in the UK. And again, one of the most famous, collectible, well, not necessarily collectible, but, you know, really famous bootleg album, you know, one that should never have been released. Naughty people put it out on the market. And it's called the Royal Albert Hall 1966. And there's two things quite remarkable about it, really. One is that it wasn't recorded at the Royal Albert Hall. The bootleggers got it wrong. It was actually that concert was recorded a week before at Manchester's Free Trade Hall, but the bootleggers got the dates mixed up. But if you get to listen to it, and it's easy, it's been released officially. Bob Dylan's done these official bootleg releases, and Albert Hall's one of them. And when you get towards the end of it, it's very famous for some audience participation. Just at the end of a track called Ballad of a Thin Man, someone in the audience shouts out, "Judas!" And Dylan replies, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." And he turns to the band, and you can hear this faintly in the background of the album. He turns to the band and says, "Play," and then a word that means very, but begins with and is a naughty way of saying very. "Play loud," and then they go into a storming version of "Like a Rolling Stone." And it was after that that he really moved into more, well, the whole electric field. But actually,
what you mentioned there, Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. That's what I mean about. That's what I mean about when you come on. It's not just. The other day, I was listening to the radio, as you do, and some songs came on, and they trigger you. They trigger your minds. Going back to the day. Even photographs going back to the day, memories. And you just said there, Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah.
I was incredible. All of a sudden, I just seen black and white telly and Peter, Paul, and Mary, singing along. I've got a couple of questions here, actually.
Okay.
Let me go through. Just let me go through. Right, I'm going to say from Mark Kinnish, Brian Edley, like this, from Mark first. So answer them when I go through them.
Okay.
Derek, did you like Buddy Holly? And I think the Beatles were influenced by him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Buddy Holly's another. He's actually more rated than you tend to think. I was watching this documentary about him the other day, and there were loads of people on talking about him, and he's very, very highly rated. I mean, they didn't have, like most of those rock and rollers, they had very few hits at the time. And what's more interesting, you actually find that people like Dylan had more commercial success, more hit singles in the UK than they did in America, particularly that rock and roll era. Like after Buddy Holly died, he doesn't have any sort of top 40 Billboard hits, whereas I don't think the Crickets did either solo, because they've got the original version, of course, of I Fought the Law. People tend to think of it as the Clash. If you're from the 70s, you think of it as the Clash. If you're from the 60s, you think of it as Bobby Full of Four. But it was on the Crickets' first album after Buddy Holly died. But yeah, I mean, he was a big influence on everybody at the time, and he was a songwriter, which was quite rare. I mean, Elvis never wrote a song in his life.
Why do you think he was such an influence, Buddy Holly? Why? Because you had Elvis. We'll be coming to Elvis anyway, but he was a big so you had Elvis there, and then all of a sudden you get Buddy Holly influencing like young lads, the likes of Paul McCartney, the likes of John Lennon.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to finish off here. Brian says a couple of questions here from him. Right. I know these questions. I know these answers myself, but I want you to answer them. So let me go through the questions first, then answer them. Okay. Derek, was it true that the Beatles weren't going to play a gig in America one time because police wanted to separate the black people from the white? And he goes on to say, I remember Madness brought out, I think when we're talking about album covers, out a single way back in the early 80s, and it was done in a photograph. I think it was a House of Fun. back then I thought that was something unreal. Derek, did Elvis ever play much in Europe or even here in Ireland? Honestly, don't know. And the lovely Karen Kariako says, evening, everyone, and a happy new year. So, can you answer those? Evening, Karen. I'm sorry, evening, Karen. And to you and Steve. Okay?
I think the last one was, did Elvis ever play outside of America? Was that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Europe. In Europe.
No, he never played Europe. What he did in about 56 or so, it was right at the beginning of his career. He played about 4 gigs in Canada. And that was as far as he ever got in terms of gigs. Hawaii, of course, he played, but that is an American state. So if you like, the only time he was off the US mainland was for a handful of gigs in Vancouver and 1 or 2 other places. And Hawaii.
Well, it's landlocked, isn't it? Really, Canada is landlocked. Yeah. And Hawaii isn't landlocked. Hawaii is an island, isn't it? So you're right there. You're right. It's the only time he ever came out of America was twice, wasn't it? You know, to Hawaii.
Well, that's right. He did step. Well, there's an interesting story about him coming to the UK. I mean, when he spent. Oh, well, when he stopped off, on his way back from Germany, when he'd finished his army service, he stopped off at Prestwick on the border in Scotland. That is actually officially well known. But about 5 years ago, there was a guy called Kendall, can't remember his name, an impresario, London impresario, who was a friend of Tommy Steele's. And he told the story that Tommy Steele had told him that while Elvis was in the army, Elvis actually came over to the UK and Tommy Steele showed him around London. And, you know, Elvis swore into secrecy. Now, whether that happened or not, you know, you pays your money and you takes your choice. But I think on balance, it might well have done, because when I researched that for something else I was doing about a year ago, and I delved right down into it. And, you know, there was the Memphis Mafia that surrounded Elvis, his mates, basically. And 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember the names, they actually lived with Elvis in Germany for the couple of years that he was on national service. And one of those guys, in answer to this Tommy Steele thing, said, oh, Elvis never went. What it was, I went to London. Tommy Steele showed me around London, and he must have confused me for Elvis. Now, I very much doubt that Tommy Steele wouldn't know what Elvis looked like by the time he got to the army. I mean, he was the biggest performer in the world. So on balance, you know, it would not surprise me if that story isn't true. And I can imagine he wouldn't want it broadcasting that much, because his manager, the Colonel Parker, was
the thing is, Derek, is why would Tommy Steele say something like that anyway?
Absolutely, he got no need to. You know, he's as famous as ever going to be. No need whatsoever. And if you imagine who would be the logical person he was the British king of rock and roll. He was the first British rock and roll star.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was very much the logical choice. If I was Elvis Presley and looking to be shown around London, I mean, Tommy Steele would be one of the first names that came to mind. But I say it's always been denied by everybody, and Prestwick refused to take down the plaque they've got in the bar that says Elvis Presley had a pint here or whatever it is, until it's actually proven that he did visit London. But
undoubtedly, because see, wherever he was, Prestwick or Stansted or wherever, I don't know where he landed.
It was Prestwick.
Was it Prestwick?
It was Prestwick.
I don't think that they had planes because it wasn't a USA Air Force plane, was it?
He might well have been on a military plane, but I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if at that time it might have been an adjacent army base, military base as well. I don't know, to be honest.
And they're in and around London, and it's not, you know, the likes of Elvis. Don't forget, he's just an ordinary soldier, isn't he?
Oh, that's right. He got the sergeant.
You know what I mean? But not 2 officers. officers. I'm talking about officers, whether they're, you know, in the army or whether they're in the USAF, you know, their Air Force.
That's true. He probably was demobbed in a civilian airplane.
Well, the thing is, you see, if Elvis's name is there and there was flights bringing soldiers who had done their tour of duty back over to America, he would have a couple of days. They couldn't just say, "Oh yeah, throw him on here now," you know, being in Prestwick or whatever for like a few hours. Well, maybe it was a couple of days that he had to stay there. So why not go around? And why would, as I said, why would Tommy Steele say, "I brought Elvis around"?
Yeah, he got no reason to make a story like that. He did confirm the story the following day. I mean, what it was, he was on the Ken Bruce show. Kendrick, can't remember his Christian name, was on the Ken Bruce show, you know, Radio 2, lunchtime, this Scottish fellow. And he told that story on then, and the following day, Tommy Steele did, certainly confirmed in the Daily Mail, I remember reading, that it was true. But it's interesting thought.
It is a little interesting story, because you hear stories, I'm not just saying about Elvis, but, you know, different people in the spotlight. And they go, "No, I don't think he was there." "Oh, yeah, right. Well, I seen her there." "Oh, go away. You never even been there." So it's things like that. But as I said, why would Tommy Steele say, "I showed Elvis around"?
Exactly.
It's I showed Prince Charles around St. George's Hall, you know, going back to, I was going to say 1807.
You're looking well on it, Frank.
I'm looking well, yeah. And anyway, I brought him around in 27 because it was our 800th birthday. And I was talking to a mate of mine, and a couple of mates, old mates, I'm going back years ago, when we were friends, you know, playing football and whatever together. And one of them said, "Did you bring the Prince around?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And he went, "Well, we were told that you brought him around by someone who worked there, you know." And I said, "Yeah." And he went, "I go, why? What would they ask you to bring him around for? Do you know?" Do you know? I said, "No, I don't know." But anyway, you know, it's things like that. So why not Elvis walk around London? Why not?
Yeah,
and why not Tommy Steele show him around?
Yeah, and because he did leave Germany, he went to Paris famously for a few days with his Memphis Mafia chums, and he had a look around Paris. So why not London? I mean, you've got to bear in mind. I mean, at that time, London was really becoming one of the music centres of the world. So, you know, for someone like Elvis, you could imagine he'd really want to visit.
Well, it was spring in London, wasn't it? You know, coming into the scene.
It was coming into spring in London, exactly.
It's like I tell you, I'll surprise you here. I was standing outside by Owen Owens in the 70s. I was buying bin bags, believe it or not. Of a lad named Blackie. He was always selling bin bags and things, you know, handkerchiefs. And I was buying some bin bags off him. And who walks down? Genuine list. He walks down. And I'm looking like that. I'm going, what is that? And Blackie goes like that. Do you know who that is? And I said, he looks there. Look, this fella was very tall. Yeah. And I'm talking about very tall. And it was looking at the size, you know, of Radio City and Owen Owens down at the time. Yeah. It's walking down the side there, going into Williamson Square. And it was Johnny Cash.
Oh, right.
He wanted to know where the cavern was.
Brilliant.
He wanted to know where the cavern was.
Yeah.
And we said, well, I think I mentioned about Elvis, and so did Blackie, you know, it mentioned Elvis. And do you know how he pronounced his name? Elvis, he said. Elvis.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Elvis. He said, "We mean Elvis." Yeah. Tall, a very tall man.
Yeah.
And I just showed him down. So I brought him down to Whitechapel
Yeah.
Whitechapel, I said, and it just shows them the day, because I had to get off. I
Yeah.
said, look, I said, just go through there, and there's your cabin. He said, thank you. See you, Elvis. Tell Elvis I was asking about it. But Elvis was there. Anyway, so, about that little finish there? Yeah, I'm not finishes. Was it true, Derek, the Beatles were looking at getting back together in the mid-70s?
I'm not sure they. What's interesting after they parted as really bad friends. Lennon and the others, McCartney rather, and the others. But they actually all played on each other's records. And I remember in the early 70s, I can't remember his name, but there was an American promoter who offered them. I can't remember the number, but it was $1 million or whatever. To play together, and they turned that particular opportunity down. But they did, if you sort of look at George Harrison albums, Ringo Starr albums, particularly, they're all playing on each other's albums. And actually, McCartney and Lennon played together for the last time in '76. I think it must have been well, it was released as a bootleg album. I think they were in New York. I think it was part of Lennon's Lost Weekend, as it were, and they were in the studio, and they jammed, and it came out on a bootleg called something like a Snort and a Toot in '74, something and a Snore in '74. A sort of play on the drug theme, a Snort and a Toot or something like that. A Toot and a Snort in '74. It's called. So I mean, they played together. I mean, had Lennon not been murdered, it wouldn't have surprised me if they hadn't got together, particularly at a Live Aid type event. Maybe not as a full concert, but it wouldn't have surprised me if they hadn't actually got together again.
Well, it's just one of those unfortunate things that happens in life. David Jones, funny enough, great historian. He'd be coming on my show. He's promised that he'd come on. He always says, I'll come on, I'll come on. So talk about history and talking about with David. And he says, Prestwick Airport was a transatlantic aircraft from Europe to the US, refueling stop.
Yeah.
So there you go. So refueling, all right, it could take whatever. But what if he landed overnight, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
think he wasn't there a few hours. Signed a few autographs. Apparently there were, word got out locally, and there were several screaming ladies by the defence, the perimeter, as it were, and he signed a few autographs, I think. He sounds like quite a nice bloke, actually, the more you read about him. He was famed for giving away Cadillacs, to arbitrary people.
Yeah, that's right. I've read a few things about, I'm talking about years ago. He picked this lad up. He was, I don't know, he was hitchhiking somewhere. The lad had no money or anything or whatever. He was looking for work. And he picked him up. And I think he was playing at Vegas. Yeah. If I'm right. I think he was, and he must have gone for a drive on his own. Went for a drive on his own. He'd seen this lad going through. And he said, I get in. And the lad couldn't believe that it was Elvis. Yeah. So when he got there, he ended up, he took a ring off his little finger and gave him the car keys. And he said, all the paraphernalia's in there, the log and whatever. He said, it's yours.
Yeah.
It's yours.
Yeah,
he gave him his car and a ring.
Yeah. Yeah, incredible.
So great man. So listen, do you know when you started off about Dylan, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Okay. When we started off with Dylan, the photographs where you see Dylan in Liverpool, you actually see photographs of Dylan in Liverpool, in the street, and he's standing there in one photograph, and there's loads of kids around him. Is that the 60 years ago?
Well, that would have probably been later than that, unless it's from that particular. Oh no, I don't think he ever left London. He did play a gig. Some very, very lucky people on a few days before, about the 22nd of December. He played at some Christmas party in some folk club in a London pub. So 40 or 50 very, very lucky people who probably don't remember the incident because nobody knew who he was at the time. Actually saw Bob Dylan perform in London in 1962 December. Absolutely incredible.
Okay, so we finish on this.
Okay.
Any idea what you'll be talking about the next time?
I don't know. I thought we might come back to a Liverpool theme, and I thought we might have a look at some of the influences on the Beatles, because we talked a little bit today about how much Bob Dylan had an influence, particularly on Lennon and his whole a pivotal point in Lennon's songwriting.
No, that would be
Royce
good.
Nellis, of course, the beat poet. He's got a big input into the Beatles story as well. And I thought, there's a handful of stuff like that. And of course, some of the musical influences. I mean, you mentioned Fats Domino earlier. I mean, he was actually the biggest selling American. He sold more hit singles in the rock and roll years in America than anybody except Elvis. And his singles were still going on in the Billboard Top 40 until about 1962. Whereas if you look at all the other people, their hit singles, rock and roll singles, have faded out long before then.
Do you know what? If you'd have said to me about, who do you reckon was up there with Elvis, just below Elvis, obviously, because he sold more. And, I would never have put Fats Domino. I was a put before Fats Chuck Berry. Yeah. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, interesting. People like Chuck Berry. I mean, he had a lot of R&B hits, but he made very little impact on the commercial charts, as it were. I mean, John Lennon suggested if you wanted to call rock and roll another name, you could do no worse than call it Chuck Berry. He's another one of these highly influential people who actually, when you look back on their commercial success at the time, they didn't have a lot. And the reason they did become, like people like Chuck Berry became very successful, was because of the British invasion. It was because of the likes of the Beatles and the Stones and the Animals, Dave Clark 5, Jerry the Pacemakers. They went over to America. They took the coals back to Newcastle, as it were. They took R&B and the blues back to America. And that was when people like B.B. King and Muddy Waters particularly found commercial international success because they were supporting people like the Stones on their tours, and the Stones music and the rest of it, and the Beatles in their earlier days doing the R&B. They popularized it and made young white audiences on both sides of the Atlantic aware of the roots of these songs. And they had really successful careers after that because of the British invasion in 64 to 66.
That's brilliant, that. I'm talking about Elvis. That's a finish now, unfortunately. But talking about Elvis, when he died, I always remember I was watching the BBC News, and it just come up. It was a shock.
Yeah,
Elvis Presley. What was his name? I always forget he has a miserable face as well. This fella from the BBC, the newsreader, John someone. And he says Elvis Presley has died, that's what. And they were interviewing people like Tom Jones, and do you know what John Lennon said? He said Elvis died when he joined the army.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
joined the army, So, but that's Lennon. That's Lennon, the activist. That's the Scouser who.
Yeah, exactly.
You can imagine what he'd be going on about today. So anyway, Derek, thank you so much. And honestly, this book here, Rock'n'Roll Unravelled by Derek Shelmerdine, look how thick it is. It's got everything in there, everything to know. Where would we get it anyway? Where would people get this?
Well, get it from my website, rock'n'rollunravelled.com, but you can order it at any bookshop. It's on the gardener's list. So it's commercially available. So if you just go into any record shop, any bookshop in the UK, basically, and ask for that and place it in. It's part of the sort of commercial listings, and anybody can get it from their local bookshop, basically.
Oh, brilliant! So anyway, so you're coming on again. We're talking about like influences.
I think that's actually good. Yeah, because you got people like Royston Ellis, the British beat poet, and then talking about him, we're going to be talking about Led Zeppelin and all kinds of stuff. That was part of what was going on in that sort of beatnik, beat poet, links to rock and roll kind of time in the late 50s, early 60s. And there's a few, Polythene Pam and stuff. I mean, she was a real amalgam of real people and stuff. So, as well as talking about obviously people like Little Richard, who influenced some of their songs and they played with in Hamburg. There's quite a range of stuff we can be chatting about associated with Beatles.
I think that'll be absolutely great, because it's not only that, but it brings back memories anyway for other people. People who are listening. As Brian Edley says, thank you, Derek, yet again. Mark Kinney says thank you as well.
Oh, thanks a lot.
So it's I'll see you in a couple of weeks then, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll chat with Jason and sort a date out, but that'll be fabulous. Yeah.
No, I'm absolutely delighted. I really am. I
enjoyed chatting to you, mate.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to say to the viewers and everybody else listening, honestly, this book is absolutely unbelievable.
Thank you.
Get it. If you're into your music, this is what you need. If you're well into your music,